Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, April 19th, 2018. Still 2018. Just checking. Wanted to say 2019 because of the 19 in the date. We are up and rolling on another show. Twitter is abuzz. We can tell you what's happening, but you probably already know if you're up and watching and listening at the same time. We can fake it. We can tell you what Bill says in Portland, all the way from Portland, Maine, what we're going to do for the show. He's got no more idea than I do, so why not? We might as well just say the show is being run from there. Daily Kos Radio is live now. Great news, Greg Dworkin, who you know on Twitter. And if you don't, by the way, do follow along at Dem from Connecticut. We both use our old-timey fake name handles from Daily Kos. Great news, Greg Dworkin arrives just in time to talk Kagro X, that's me, down from off the ledge. Is that good news? Why don't you just let me get that release and get it all over? I don't know what you would do on Friday, but certainly by Monday somebody else could take over this show. I hope any one of you could turn on the radio machine and do this just as well. I know you don't believe it, but it's true. I'm trying to bring you along 5 minutes or so at a time when you submit your own segments to the show, and we've got a few on tap and pretty soon, I think, ready to arrive. Some new voices, which will be fantastic. And always willing and interested to add those to the mix. What's happening this morning? What are people talking about? What stories are being circulated? Well, let's see. So far, a lot of good karma stories. That is to say, bad karma for bad people, which is a good thing for the rest of us, I think, largely. I may just misunderstand the whole karma thing and maybe, creating more trouble for myself in the future than this is all worth. But I've been interested to watch this. The two stories that have made me think of that. First, and I guess the one getting the most notice this morning, Michael Cohen, still in the news, which is always a great thing for an attorney representing a high-profile client. When you, instead, are the news, it's the worst possible thing, of course. Let's see. This I've seen reported all over the place. I happen to have grabbed Josh Gerstein's tweet, Josh from Politico, tweeting, breaking, at that point it was, embattled Trump attorney, and he now earns that moniker, embattled Trump attorney Michael Cohen drops libel suits against BuzzFeed and Fusion GPS, which is an interesting turn of events. I can just open up the story and give you the lowdown on it, but, well, I think the title of the story, the headline has pretty much done that, which means it's a pretty good headline, unless, of course, we find out somewhere in here that technically he hasn't dropped them and we've all been misled, but I think so. Embattled attorney Michael Cohen has dropped a pair of much-touted libel suits against BuzzFeed and the private investigation firm Fusion GPS over publication of the so-called dossier detailing alleged ties between President Donald Trump and Russia. Basically, the story is this. Cohen's attorney, and again, it's always good when your attorneys have attorneys. Cohen's attorney says, "We believe the defendants defamed my client." He says, "The decision to voluntarily discontinue these cases was a difficult one. They still think they're right. And that vindicating Mr. Cohen's rights was and still remains important. But given the events that have unfolded, i.e. you're a huge liar and you're out of money and you were a fake all along and probably going to lose this lawsuit, and the time, attention, and resources needed to prosecute these matters, we have dismissed the matters despite their merits." And why is that a karma story? Well, as I see it, these are the tactics. Well, I should say, I said it this way. It's tough to fight. It's a tough thing to get along and fight and find the resources to fight on 5 different fronts. And of course, now he's in personal trouble. He's trying to fight battles for Donald Trump. He's terrible at fighting battles for Donald Trump in this context anyway. And so he's exhausted and probably spending an awful lot of money, certainly spending more time than he wanted to on these things. It's difficult to be able to take on all comers. And what the karma part of it is, of course, this is exactly the sort of tactic that he used to bully people on Donald Trump's behalf for many, many years. And the idea was always to overwhelm their adversaries with the number of suits and to threaten them with the fact that Donald Trump, fake billionaire, had bottomless pockets from which to pay to fight and tooth and nail. And even if it really wasn't worth that much money to him in the end, as far as the suit went, he would do it just to embarrass you, and he had money to burn. So you might as well just drop it, either drop the suit against him or settle with him or pay up or whatever it was. And I think it's good karma that this would come back and be his downfall. He thinks he's right. He thinks he can win these cases, he says, but he's going to have to give up because too many people of means have actually ganged up against him and pushed him up against the wall and put him in the situation he used to put people in professionally, that they would have to realize, I'm right, but I can't win because I haven't got the resources and time to fight my way to victory, an Pyrrhic victory at that, and so I'll have to stand here and say I lose instead. So good news on that front. A little bit of karma also out there for Rex Tillerson, who apparently being profiled in a new book here about his short time at the State Department and the purging of the State Department, but we'll get to that perhaps later on because Greg Dworkin is waiting in the wings. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. So when Bill put that tweet out,
Yes.
he answered, I've withdrawn my lawsuit against Armando for defamation. He says I'm wrong sometimes, which of course isn't true, but I couldn't deal with the discovery part. And also, I know people who know people in Brighton Beach.
And that's a dangerous place.
Yeah, it is. So there's a lot of things I want to talk about today. And let's just do a little lightning round thing, and hopefully we'll get to it. But in case we don't, you have time on the show. You want more instant karma? How about Eric Greitens, the governor of Missouri, who's going to be impeached if he doesn't step down?
All right.
How about Chris Kobach, who is cited for contempt of court for lying about what he's doing in Kansas with voters? Those are two stories out there.
Right. Well, he deserves
and by
that.
the way, especially in Missouri, that's certainly helping Claire McCaskill.
Yeah, pretty good. Okay, this is all good news. I did hear about those, although I wasn't up to date entirely on Greitens.
The Missouri one is really great because I guess the Attorney General, who is a Republican, is finding out that Eric Greitens did a whole bunch of stuff wrong, so naturally Greitens is going to sue the Attorney General.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I think I did see
so we'll get to that one. But other lightning round things here?
Yeah.
Again, these are things I just want to cover to make sure that I don't forget to do it, because at my age I forget half the stuff I was going to tell you.
Right. Who is this?
Here's one from TPM. Largest manufacturer of bump stocks will stop taking orders and shut down their site.
Huh? Okay. Once again, depriving Americans of their First Amendment rights to Second Amendment rights or whatever amendment we're on. NRA takes the position that not selling their members something is an egregious constitutional violation.
Right. Slide Fire Solutions, which is based in Moran, Texas. No comment about Moran and its famous sign. You remember that one?
I can guess.
Get a brain, Morans.
Yeah.
Slide Fire Solutions, which is based in Moran, Texas, posted a message on its website saying the company will stop taking orders at midnight on May 20th. The company provided no other details and did not say why it was shutting down. Now, chances are it's got something to do with money, because everything has to do with either sex or money. Sure,
and I can't really figure the sex part on this, but surprise me, Moran. Go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose. Eric Schneiderman has some stuff in the news talking about the fact that he'd like to change the law in New York State about double jeopardy. He wants to make sure that if Trump pardons somebody like, let's say, Michael Cohen, that you can't then be sued for the same crime, because that would be double jeopardy. New York State has a double jeopardy law. He wants to change that. And he's advising attorney generals all over the country to change their laws if they have such a thing, just in case.
Yeah, well, that could possibly be necessary. There's a lot to that. Okay, well,
I know, but
we'll
I mean, we don't necessarily. You do maybe later in the show. I wasn't going to dwell on that, but it's just fascinating, true, and something to pay attention to.
Okay, on that basis, we should do that.
All right. We talked yesterday about Senate procedure.
Yeah, that thing.
House procedure and Senate procedure about, what happens if you want to actually bring something to the floor that the leaders don't want you to bring. Oh, I don't know, let's say a Robert Mueller protection bill or something like that.
Or your baby. Apparently that's an issue too.
Well, what if there were 10 babies, said Orrin Hatch this morning.
I don't know. What if?
I don't know. What if there were? I mean, you say that as if that's a problem.
Yeah, as it shouldn't be saying that as a Mormon, by the way. There's a lot of large families out there. Maybe Tammy Duckworth has plans.
Right. So this is a movie reference, right? I'm not just gratuitously throwing sex out there.
Oh.
But what if you resign your commission, Hot Lips? What if you do?
Well, hey, anything can happen.
Yeah,
what an odd thing. And
resign your damn commission. All right, Orrin, bring babies to the floor.
Right,
what do we care?
What if you guys like swimming naked in the gym? And
anyway, so this is a piece from Paul Kane, which is, I thought, pretty interesting this morning as a follow-up. Because remember, in the House, as we went through yesterday, there's two separate ways of bringing up a discharge petition for people who don't want to, for people who want to bring up a bill or a rule that the Speaker doesn't want to bring up. In the Senate, there is no such thing. But Mitch McConnell is the one who decides whether or not stuff comes to the floor.
Okay.
He's the, leader, right?
Yes, apparently.
So Paul Kane has a piece this morning. McConnell, the Senate's decider, discovers the limits of his control. And it was interesting. And this has to do with what happened yesterday with the Coast Guard and NASA.
Oh.
As Paul Kane writes, they're not exactly the most controversial government agencies.
No.
But what happened is that the chamber failed to get enough support to advance a bill updating the Coast Guard. And then for more than an hour, the roll call remained deadlocked on the confirmation of the new NASA administrator because Jeff Flake was holding out.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of people who are not there. John McCain isn't there. And
that's good news.
Mike Pence was in Florida to meet with Abe, the Japanese prime minister, and as a result, wasn't there to break ties.
Whoops.
So it was a 49-49 tie. And Flake didn't really have objections to the NASA nominee. He just raised concerns about the nomination of Mike Pompeo, and he wanted Pompeo to meet with him. And he held up the nomination until he got assurances that Pompeo would meet with him.
Oh, okay. Well, that's dumb, but I mean, it's good for him.
But you can, right?
Yeah. Right. Well, dumb and can I do it is two different questions.
But the point is, let's say, remember, I read you a list of like 7 or 8 senators.
Yeah.
Who were interested in protecting Bobby Three Sticks, Robert Mueller, on the Republican side.
Yes.
Right? And they include people like Corker and Collins and so on and so forth. So what if they decided they were going to hold up, I don't know, the Secretary of State appointment? Or what if they decided they were going to hold up the CIA appointment? Or what if they decided they were going to hold up any further Donald Trump appointment unless McConnell actually does bring it to the floor? In other words, they could completely tie up the Senate in knots if they felt like it.
Yes. And
it's to the point, because of the small majority, that 1 or 2 of them could do that.
Yep. It's odd that we're not seeing it.
Well, we saw a little bit of it yesterday. And the point of this article is that we're actually going to see it going forward. It's a lesson on when you have a very narrow majority, said Senator Lamar Alexander, chairman of the Health Committee. Yes. McConnell's trouble goes beyond having a very narrow majority. For intents and purposes, he doesn't have a governing majority on most days. He's only got about 45 reliable votes. So Collins, Murkowski, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Bob Corker, all for different reasons.
Yes,
could tie up the Senate at any given time.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
It's the same routine is playing out on the nomination of Gina Haspel, the deputy CIA director, to replace Pompeo. Most Democrats have voiced opposition. And Ron Paul intends to vote no. And what's to stop the Republicans who support the Mueller protection bill from refusing to back Haspel until McConnell allows a vote?
They might win, and they don't want that.
Right. So I'm just saying that, and I'm not predicting that this is going to happen or that somehow McConnell is toppled or that his will is thwarted. He's been pretty good so far about this. But it's, one doesn't have to invoke a 60 a vote, a situation in the Senate to get your will done here.
Right. Definitely true. It's another
if
weapon.
you really feel like it, and if you have a backbone and a spine, you can actually force some stuff to happen against the will of the Senate Majority Leader.
Yes. Or against somebody else's will. Anyway,
yeah,
like
because if he doesn't give in, then you don't
Pompeo's.
give in, and then nothing gets done. And if it's something important, then you have a little bit of leverage there. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that is true. It just depends on how you use it. Like for yesterday, for that hour, I guess we were left in the dark, and people thought, Jeff Flake might oppose the NASA administrator's nomination because the NASA administrator or the nominee is a thief. And that would be a good reason to block him. Oh, he just wanted to meet with Mike Pompeo? Oh, okay. So, the leverage was there. He got what he wanted. And tomorrow, Susan Collins can hold out for fried chicken on the Senate cafeteria menu over, the CIA nomination. But miraculously, she'll get the chicken, and the nomination will go through.
Right. Or I don't even know if she'll get the chicken. She'll be promised chicken.
That's true. We might be able to get away with that with her. Well, I promise you chicken next week. But yeah, the difficulty is people are discovering or remembering that they have this leverage, and they're using it at important flexion points in exchange for some other dumb thing that has nothing to do with what they're voting on, which is okay, and it's doable, and it's a way people get things done in the Senate all the time. It's just, as you're watching, don't make the mistake of believing that they oppose the question being voted on.
Right, exactly. And at the same time, don't assume that we're doomed, that there's nothing we can do.
Sure,
that,
why not?
That may or may not be true.
Assume that. Right.
So let's get down to some criminal
turn on a dime.
activity here.
Okay. Yes. All right.
One of our favorite things. I'm going to get back to Michael Cohen. We talked about Michael Cohen yesterday. We talked about him on Monday. Monday was the taxi medallions. Yesterday we were going into a little bit more. We already mentioned that he's afraid to sue anybody because then they're going to do discovery and then they'll find out he's a crook and that his family's a crook and he comes from a whole line of crooks and everybody he knows has been indicted, So that's the deal. This is Josh Marshall writing yesterday. Good grief. Cohen's world gets mobbier the closer I look.
Yes.
And then he has a podcast here where he looks in the background. We talked about this. You read a great ProPublica piece after I left the show yesterday, really delving into a lot of this stuff.
Yes, he's a scumbag.
Felix Sater
I'll say it. Yeah.
was actually a childhood friend. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But here's one that filling out this picture of how Cohen fell into this stuff. We've always been focused on the fact that Cohen's uncle, Morton Levine, owned and ran a Brooklyn social club, El Caribe. Did you cover that?
We didn't cover it yesterday, though. It did get a mention that, his uncle ran the social club where the Russian and Italian mob hung out, held offices, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
Levine and medical
the
doctors
bada bing.
never been charged with a crime. And I guess you also covered the fact that at least operating at or about some of the places that Michael Cohen also worked were some personal injury
Right.
Fake rings of insurance fraud.
None of that's been proven against my client.
Or at least my client, just everybody
Right.
he knows.
Oh, wait, that guy was my client? All right. Well, none of this has been proven against my other client.
Right. So according to published reports in the 70s and 80s, the boss of the Russian mob in New York, and for practical purposes the whole U.S., was a man named Evsei Agron. Things ended badly for Agron when he was gunned down in a mob hit in 1985. After Agron was assassinated, his organization was taken over by the underboss, Marat Balagula.
Yes.
Authorities believe he was behind Agron's killing, but he was never charged. He ran things till 91 when he was convicted of gasoline bootlegging. Okay?
That's an old school Russian crime, man. I didn't even know you could do that here.
Right? So it turns out that there was a fellow who was a bodyguard for both of them, Boris Nayfield. I guess he wasn't as good a bodyguard because the first guy got gunned down. He did a little bit better with the second guy.
Well, maybe. Wink, wink.
But he took over the organization.
Wow, he took over the organization and he was in charge of the security of the first two guys? That's amazing. Okay.
So Michael Cohen's uncle was also the headquarters of Russian organized crime, and it turns out that everybody owned a piece of it. Michael Cohen owned a portion of the ownership of that club.
That's the way those Russian socialists
when Donald
do it.
Trump was elected president, so it was really recently.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the Soviet Union they took along with them. Everybody owns a piece of this.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, there's just more. This is from the Chicago Sun-Times today. Trump's lawyer's family lends $20 million to wife of Chicago cab mogul.
Isn't that something? I was confused reading that. Say, why did he have so much difficulty finding $130,000 for Stormy Daniels?
Yeah, his father-in-law gave $20 million to a guy who happens to be named Yasa Steiner, who runs the Chicago Medallion Management Corporation. Mm-hmm. And her husband, Semyon Steiner, was identified in a warrant the FBI used to raid Cohen's office and home looking for documents. They've received 8 loans from Cohen's father-in-law, Fema Schusterman, according to documents filed with Cook County Recorder of Deeds. So there's a lot of money being passed around.
Yeah.
And again, we talked about on Monday how the taxi cab business, because it brings in a lot of cash, at least it used to before you started doing credit cards to pay, your taxi fees as you got in, was very useful for money laundering. And I'm not saying that this was money laundering. I'm just saying there's a lot of money going back and forth.
Right.
And, the idea that everybody that Michael Cohen knows is under investigation is just an interesting thing.
That's all.
Right? Now, Cohen himself has a dozen other medallions that have been suspended by Rahm Emanuel's administration for 89 violations, including having expired insurance and license plates.
The Chicago Democrat machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Cohen medallions are operated by Dispatch Taxi, a different company, created by Savas Tsitsiris and Evgeny Gene Friedman to operate 400 cabs in Chicago. And they're the business partners, and both men operate taxis in New York City as well.
Yeah, I never felt so good about Uber.
Yeah. So, it's just interesting that Cohen has all these connections. And so here's the deal. And there's a big piece in the Wall Street Journal about that. Trump's previous lawyer to Michael Cohen told Trump, the chances of Michael Cohen taking a bullet for you and protecting you are like 0.
Yeah, he did say that. I don't think I put that article aside. Is that in your list?
It's not on my list. I could find it for you.
Yeah, maybe we'll pull that so everybody can see it. Yeah. I was interested in that one. I really thought.
It's a longtime legal advisor to Donald Trump named Jay Goldberg.
Okay.
I'll put that at the bottom of the list here.
Yeah.
In a little tiny narrow Skype thing there.
Okay.
Cohen would turn against president if charged, counselor warned Trump.
Yes.
Well, prosecutor Jay Goldberg says he cautioned president that his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, could be compelled to cooperate with prosecutors. I mean, Cohen is just up to his neck in so much potential bank fraud, campaign finance violations.
Yep.
Investigators are examining whether Cohen committed bank fraud and using a home equity line of credit to pay the former porn star for her silence. That would be Stormy Daniels.
Right.
As well as potential campaign finance violations related to the payment. Michael will never stand up for you if charged by the government, Mr. Goldberg said. He cautioned the president. This is coming from Mr. Goldberg. Neither Mr. Cohen, who hasn't been charged, nor his lawyer responded to requests for comment. But the White House confirmed the phone call took place.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I don't know who would stand up for him, but and by the way, of course, standing up for him means clamming up and doing a jail term rather than testifying against him.
Right.
So
speaking from his experience as a prosecutor, he said even hardened organized crime figures flip under pressure from the government. The mom was broken by Sammy the Bull Gravano caving in out of the prospect of a jail sentence. And Mr. Goldberg provided fresh details about the search warrants, which he said he learned after recent conversations with Mr. Trump and his lawyers, so I guess they weren't privileged, huh? Mr. Cohen faces scrutiny over his payment to the former adult movie star Stephanie Clifford for her silence, that's Stormy Daniels, as well as the taxi business, which we were just talking about. And let's see what else we got. The agents were perfect gentlemen, but their guns were visible, he said.
Oh, well.
That's a nice little detail.
That's a good
there.
thing. In Trump world, that's awesome.
Right?
Oh, well.
And Mr. Goldberg said he warned Mr. Trump in the Friday call against admitting to an interview with Mr. Mueller's team, telling him talking is a certain trap. Don't ever do it.
Yeah, but he's just finished saying that he was totally going to do that.
Right. So, you have all of that out there. And it just, to me, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just reading the stories in the press. One gets the impression, without knowing, because we don't know the details, that the guy's a crook. And so if you raided his office and took stuff, it's going to wind up being evidence of stuff that was not legal. And so, sure, you can delay it a little bit by insisting that a special master or even a grandmaster or an apprentice master could go over that stuff and go through it little by little, giving some to the government and giving some back to Michael Cohen. But that just delays it for a tiny amount of time, and you're still guilty, and you're still going to, have all that stuff come out. And by the way, is there any relationship whatsoever to Donald Trump? We don't know that. But everybody around him seems to be falling like, like dominoes and getting indicted and so on and so forth. And if you put pressure on a guy like this, as we used to say in the neighborhood, a big macha who thinks he knows everything, and you put a little pressure on him, then what happens?
I don't know. Usually they flip.
Says Donald Trump's previous lawyer. Not me, but Jay Goldberg says this. So we'll see.
All right, we'll see if he's right, see if he provides good counsel and all of that. I thought there was some chance that they would be pressing him to flip. I actually thought there was some chance that Michael Cohen, the other day when he was smoking cigars outside of the Lowe's Regency, was going to go in there and have a steak dinner and then jump off the roof of the place rather than go through this. And he still may do that, and I don't know whether it'll be him jumping or someone throwing him or what.
Back from BuzzFeed tells you something,
Yeah. Okay, that's true. We'll be back in 2 minutes to discuss it some more. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin's still with us. Let's see. We left off with cliffhanger, that is to say, Russian mobsters hanging Michael Cohen off a cliff by 1 foot and making him write a suicide note. And I think we're kind of done with that guy for the moment. But certainly if there's any breaking news, we'll bring it to you. Or if there's anything else you need to shoehorn in, Greg.
Well, I want to just finish that up and segue to Donald Trump and the elections with this piece from Crooked by Brian Beutler, where he talks about the whole criminality of it. It was kind of an answer to Adam Davidson's piece about this being the beginning of the end of the Trump presidency.
Okay.
And what Brian Beutler says, with a cautionary note, the Russia and Cohen investigations exposed Trump and his campaign and his business organization to such serious legal jeopardy that it's difficult to fathom a future in which criminality and corruption aren't the traits that define Trump's presidency. That's one way to conceive of Davidson's end stage. But it doesn't mean his presidency couldn't limp along for years, hobbled by its legal woes, a zombie presidency, but a presidency nonetheless, with many mighty instruments of power still at his disposal. What we know to a near certainty is that as the heat increases, Trump will try to enlist more and more people into this thing of his. Right?
Yes.
Our thing, Cosa Nostra, as his only means of political survival, and perhaps as his only means of sparing those friends of his from justice. He will extort support from the ranks of Republican officialdom, which may already be too tainted by allegiance to Trump that credibly sever ties with its criminal leader. And then, of course, he conscripts the supporters by using people like Sean Hannity. And the terrifying thing about it, Beutler writes, is he might succeed.
Yes.
Reaching the beginning of the end doesn't imply justice will prevail swiftly or even that it will prevail at all. The end stage of Trump's presidency is upon us, but it isn't one in which he ultimately loses, necessarily. It may turn out to be the one that we do. So that's something that we have to do the work on. You can't just expect it to happen for you. But let's take a bigger picture about what's going on here. One thing I didn't give you is a piece by Larry Sabato, who points out that if you're looking at political models which are just based on fundamentals.
I love looking at models.
Presidential, stay out of the gutter. If you're talking about presidential approval and how the economy is doing, which is fairly well, you would predict that Trump would win re-election because he's incumbent, and incumbents usually do.
That's true.
In 2020.
You know how
But that's assuming he runs.
Not normal.
That's assuming nothing else happens. That's assuming that none of this Mueller stuff amounts to anything. I find those somewhat difficult assumptions, but you have to acknowledge that from a fundamental point of view, the Republicans aren't doomed to lose.
True.
They never are. In a two-party system, it's always going to be a close election until you see what happens, and there are huge advantages of incumbency. Of course, Trump will have a record to run on, which is a different story altogether. And little things like, a recession due to tariffs might matter. And a lot of things matter. So let's look at some of the stuff that does matter, with that being the background. This is a piece by Erica Warner in the Washington Post. Republicans fear political risk in Senate races as House moves to extend tax cuts. The Republicans decided that their tax bill wasn't good enough. It's not, as they say, the political gift they had expected it to be last year. So what do? You pass more tax cuts.
I guess so.
But if you do that, just from a strategic political point of view, forget about the fact that it's bad policy. Just looking at the politics of that. If the Republicans try to pass another tax cut, let's say for the 99% that didn't get a break this time.
Well, that would be interesting, but okay, well.
But if they did, because they decided that was the only way to get reelected,
all right.
Then red state senators who happen to be Democrats would vote for it.
They might.
And if they vote for it, how do you run against them for not cooperating with tax cuts? So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is under pressure to block a vote, this article says, which Republican campaign strategists worry could allow red state Democrats to vote for additional tax cuts and undermine one of the GOP's most effective lines of attack in conservative states. The Democrats voted against the big tax cut last December.
Have they considered lying?
Therefore, nothing has happened. And don't forget, as we talked about just at the beginning of the last segment, it just takes one or two Republican senators to gum up everything for Mitch McConnell.
True. Well, I put that out there as a possible alternative for them to consider. Lying.
Yeah, they could do that. But the GOP debate shows how the tax bill, which Republicans rushed to pass in December, despite the enormous complexity of overhauling the tax code, has not become the campaign booster Republicans said it would be. That's really the main thing to come away from.
Now, the question is, can they meta-lie and say it has become the campaign booster that they hoped? And will people say, wow, they're winning, and start supporting them? I don't know. I don't know if it really works.
Well, let me give you another example on how that works and doesn't work. This is from the New York Times. Across the Midwest, farmers warn of GOP losses over Trump's trade policy. China's proposed tariffs on soybeans would hit hard in Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, North Dakota, and other states with highly competitive House and Senate races.
Okay.
And they're pretty ticked off. And so stern warnings are coming from all over the Midwest about the political peril for Republicans. He wanted to save steel, right? So he can get the Pittsburgh area.
Is it really still about steel there? Okay.
Well, that's what the tariffs are about.
Yeah.
But from pork farms of Iowa and soybean fields in North Dakota and Kansas, things are not going so well. They're not in touch with the reality of the Midwest and the impact that Harris would have, said Bart Bergquist, a biology professor and part-time farmer.
Oops. Now I don't hear you. I can see you're still connected. What's up? Check your... Oh, there you are. I hear you.
Okay, not my fault.
Right. Okay. So you
That
were
was the
saying,
internet.
Stupid internet. I hate you. Except we couldn't exist without you. Beyond that,
The farmers
yes,
are getting
farmers.
upset, and they're saying, I know my neighbors are not rolling in money, and they're nervous about it. I listened to this farm show over the noon hour on WHO Daily, Mr. Young said, of Iowa's leading radio station. They're usually a happy-go-lucky bunch promoting industry and holding a 2-hour infomercial for the Farm Bureau, but the last couple of months, I'm wondering if they need to take the sharp objects out of the studio.
Huh. Wow. So he listens to a farm program. Well, that's work
Karl
related.
Rove, the former strategist to President George W. Bush, said a trade clash would limit Midwestern enthusiasm from our base and limit our ability to hold what we have and pick up more seats. Mr. Rove also grumbled that Mr. Trump has little to no understanding of the farm coalition or foreign policy or domestic policy or international policy. But, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, he doesn't eat vegetables, so what does he care? I mean, meat comes from farms too. No, it doesn't. It comes from the supermarket, or I sell my own Trump steaks and they're just made by God or whatever. Yeah. Well, he's a dummy. And also, even if he wasn't, he wouldn't care because he doesn't give a crap about people. So, sorry.
Instead, there were already whispers in Washington and agricultural states that the president is risking a replay of President Jimmy Carter's grain embargo on the Soviets, which contributed to the massive losses Democrats suffered in 1980. So that's the background. So now we have tax policy, we have the tariffs and how they're playing in the Midwest, and then the third of the triad here is a piece from Axios. GOP will tout individual mandate repeal, but it could backfire.
Oh.
If you're a strategist looking at this stuff this morning, this isn't going so well.
Yeah, it's all, a list of things that will backfire.
Republicans are planning to campaign aggressively on the repeal of the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate, despite the high likelihood that insurers will announce big round of premium increases weeks before the election.
Yeah.
Right? They're counting on the mandate's unpopularity to shield them from Democrats' claims of sabotage.
Okay.
Really? Just think about that. I mean, they've sabotaged it, and they're actually responsible for the premium increases that are coming, and they're trying to figure out how to shield themselves from that, and they're figuring out it's not really working.
Okay. Again, my advice would be lie.
Right? The other side. Some Republican aides and strategists acknowledge this strategy could backfire by either reminding voters of the unpopular Affordable Care Act repeal effort or by linking vulnerable members to premium hikes, which Democrats are already trying to do. I think you just confront it head on and say, was your health care situation better before Obamacare or not? You do have to go make that argument, said Tom Cole. If you let the Democratic argument stand in a background, that's when you get into trouble. That is to say, if they tell the truth, you're screwed. Yeah. So you got those three big things out there, and this is what people vote on. They may not know what Michael Cohen is or what it means to have taxi medallions in New York City. And they may say, well, it's all got nothing to do with Donald Trump because motivated reasoning tells me that I don't want to believe it. But tax policy that affects your own taxes, healthcare policy that affects your own healthcare premiums, and tariffs that are ruining your business, they're all out there for the midterms.
Yeah. Well, if only people knew the facts and were able to determine which ones were true and which ones weren't, we'd be in fantastic shape. The question is, will they instead just be told, yes, premiums on your health insurance are going up because Obamacare, which I oppose. And will that work? I mean, it shouldn't, not by logic, but, if that's what you hear on television.
This may be the first election where you can't run on Obamacare repeal for them. And because they're candidates in a box, they don't know how to handle that.
True. Yeah, I mean, that makes things very difficult unless they get a new box shipped to them quickly.
Well, by who?
Full of
They're
lies.
Retiring a speaker who's no longer there?
Well, he didn't know how to fill the box anyway. I don't know. Newt Gingrich, I guess he's the guy who used to send those boxes out, and I don't know where. I guess he's stuck on. He's got a problem with something about a large statue on the mall that Callista is bothering him about. He's still around. She's in Rome. He's hanging out here, I think. And I don't know. I don't know who would fill the box for them.
So the Cook political report notes that Democrats are raising money hand and fist. They've gotten the latest FEC filings. And they're updating their ratings in 7 districts, all reflecting improved Democratic prospects based on money raised.
Great. Everybody
now,
go
most of them
windsurfing.
are going from solid to likely or likely to lean Republican. But that's what happens in a wave. If you go from solid to lean or solid to there's one that caught my eye, particularly Illinois 14, Hultgren, likely R to lean R. Then Arizona 2, Hill, likely R to lean R. Leaning R's might well fall in a wave.
Right, because they're leaning.
Well, let's look. I think I mentioned to you that Joe Donnelly's doing pretty well in polling in Indiana. And this is a piece from Politico. GOP fears rise over West Virginia Senate fiasco because Don Blankenship is running and might spoil their chances to knock off Joe Manchin.
Yeah, he might.
And then we have this whole thing about Eric Greitens and what's happening in Missouri. And that's going to really, really help Claire McCaskill, who's a very, very smart politician. Yes. Everybody always underrates her.
Yeah, well, she's always she finds herself very frequently the underdog and
finds a way to win.
Yeah. Or finds a way to let everybody know that the other guy shot themselves in the foot. And that doesn't happen naturally all the time. These guys shoot themselves in the feet all the time, and everybody says, great, I'm for the Second Amendment. She's just particularly adept at saying, he's bleeding out his foot. Right. Yeah, I got you.
Nate Silver had a tweet yesterday.
Good for you, Nate.
Which said that I'm on Team Cruz could lose.
Okay, it sounds fun.
Right? The arguments to the contrary remind me a little too much of the arguments that Democrats could never lose a presidential election in Pennsylvania. Could lose doesn't mean he will lose. Cruz is a favorite, but, I take Beto at 4-1. Beto's raising so much money. And there's some recent polls out showing that things are fairly close, way closer than you would think. Quinnipiac, for example. But Quinnipiac shows that Trump's rating in Texas is only 43%.
How's he doing
and
in
so
Moran?
That's the background where you could see an upset.
Yeah.
But it would be an upset because Cruz remains the favorite.
It'd be pretty good. If it stays this close, or it looks like he's going to lose, sell your stock in Campbell's.
Right. So what do we have? We have, on the one hand, the fairly steady but not overwhelming 7 to 8 point, maybe 6 to 8 point would be a fairer way to say it, generic lead in the congressional ballot, which is just at the cusp of the Democrats taking the House, not overwhelming. And you have the fundamentals saying that in 2020 Trump could be reelected because if you assume he's a normal person, the incumbent president with a decent economy always has a chance of being reelected. On the other side, you have all the stuff that's going on with the Southern District of New York with Michael Cohen and the fact that he may be forced into flipping, and you have Robert Mueller's Russia stuff. And fundamentally there, no matter how you slice it, the underlying situation is those guys might in fact actually be guilty. And it's just a question of how long it's going to take for that stuff to come out.
Yeah.
And you have all the individual things that are happening in individual states, which really don't look good for the Republicans, whether it's Joe Donnelly having a lead in Indiana or whether it's Joe Manchin with the prospect of running against Don Blankenship, or whether it's Heidi Heitkamp being able to use these soybean tariffs in order to get herself reelected. And all of a sudden, the Senate is in play as well, and that's the state of play right now.
All right, an amazing series of coincidences in which the Republicans idiotically put themselves behind every 8 ball they can find.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, maybe they're incompetent as a governing party.
So, a lot of interesting things and a lot of moving pieces and a lot of moving parts that are going on. And then let's finish.
All right.
Okay. With Governor Greitens.
Oh, yes.
Asking a court to issue restraining order against Attorney General Hawley.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. A restraining order.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. A restraining order. Governor Eric Greitens' attorneys have asked the Cole County judge to issue a restraining order blocking Attorney General Josh Hawley from investigating the governor. The motion was filed the night before Hawley announced that his office had uncovered potentially criminal acts committed by Greitens regarding his use of a charity's donor list. This isn't even a sex thing. To benefit his 2016 gubernatorial campaign. He turned over the evidence to the St. Louis prosecutor to consider criminal charges, which he said could be a felony. Greeton's attorneys had also asked the judge to appoint a special prosecutor independent of Hawley's office for purposes of conducting any such investigation. The motion argues that Hawley compromised his investigation of the governor when he publicly called on Greetons to resign last week. After a report by a House committee detailed allegations of sexual violence and blackmail against Greetons.
Oh, well, maybe he prejudiced his case against him for the rape, but he still should be open to all viewpoints when it comes to campaign finance violations. I understand his objection. It's just wrong. I mean,
right.
Too bad. Although, it's an extraordinary thing. Temporary restraining order. Stop enforcing the law, top law enforcement official.
So I was looking at this poll here. The last poll I see for Claire McCaskill running against a fellow named Josh Hawley is that it's a pretty close race.
Oh.
The last thing I saw was, maybe a 1 or 2 point lead for McCaskill, but that's about it.
She should file a temporary restraining order motion against him to stop him from running for Senate.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just saying, it's kind of a rather interesting thing. Here's a Vox-plainer about Missouri's chaotic, contentious Senate race explained. Missouri's Claire McCaskill might be 2018's most vulnerable Senate Democrat, but with all the stuff that's going on with Greetons and Hawley, maybe not so much.
Yeah, she and again, you'd think what a lucky person she is to draw, what was his name, legitimate rape guy that shot himself in the foot. And how come every time a statewide Republican emerges to take her on in Missouri, it turns out to be either a horrible person, or I guess we haven't figured that out yet. I go Josh Hawley later. We'll get to that, but or some circumstance arises based on the Missouri Republican Party producing horrible people at its top leadership levels. It seems like it happens over and over again, and must just be some kind of strange Claire McCaskill magic, or of course the thoroughgoing corruption of the party at national and state levels.
Right, but which, by the way, should be a boost for her re-election. So that's the state of play right at the moment, And it's interesting because every time on Twitter I tweet about the fact that, Greetons is in trouble and that's going to hurt Hawley because they're having a feud, and that in turn is going to hurt Hawley's race against Claire McCaskill, and that Don Blankenship may hurt the Republicans. He may be a Roy Moore-style guy. Don't forget, he was convicted of murder. For all practical purposes, he was,
Yes.
He let the coal mines collapse against people.
So did the Commerce Secretary. No one cared.
Yeah, right. But you have all this stuff going on, and then you have what's going on with Michael Cohen, and I'll write about this and saying, this is really not good for the Republican Party, and people will say, well, don't get complacent.
Oh, all right.
And I'm thinking to myself, Inigo Montoya, complacent. You keep using this word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Yes.
We already talked about the fact that the fundamentals may well say that Trump has a decent fighting chance if he were a normal person. He's not a normal person.
Right.
And the fact that this stuff is happening, look, this just because you talk about how the Republicans are doing badly in the Midwest, that's not the bat signal for all Democrats to stay home and assume that the election is won. Far from it. It means that the hard work that you're doing, whether you're in the resistance or whether you're running for office yourself, it just means that all that hard work is paying off, and that's fine. That's a morale booster. That's not a complacency thing.
Yeah, right. Now, if we all go windsurfing, that's an issue.
Who are you, John Kerry?
I don't know. I like Swiss cheese.
I suppose.
I don't.
So anyway, here it is, 9:50 on Thursday, and that's my wrap-up for today. You've got the rest of the show. You got a lot of material here if you want to go over it, or maybe you want to do stuff of your own. The thing about Kagro in the morning is you never know where David's going to go.
Right.
And so I'll stick around to listen a little bit. I got to go to work, but I'll be back Monday, and we'll talk again.
All right. We'll do that. And, assuming there's a Monday, and I think so. I'm not going to get complacent about it and just try to go straight to Tuesday,
Exactly right.
Take care. Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. Have a good weekend. And, it should be a weird one. Is Donald Trump back from Mar-a-Lago? Or is he staying down there through the weekend? This is an awful long time for him to be staying at Mar-a-Lago. And sometimes it calms him down, but sometimes it sends him off the edge, too. Not like, he's relaxed, but sometimes for him, getting relaxed means, like, forgetting that you're president and going crazy. And it's hard to tell the difference between his wound up going crazy and relaxed going crazy, because he's not a normal person, doesn't function very well at any level, and so, it's confusing. But we'll keep an eye on it. I have a feeling it's going to be a bit of a weird one. All right, well, thanks for bringing us up to date on this. I am curious. We'll have to keep 1.5 eyes on Missouri, because this will be really interesting. There'll be a period during which I think potential McCaskill supporters will be impressed with and favorably inclined toward Josh Hawley, as he has this battle with the considerably more odious, I guess, Eric Greitens. But in the end, he's still a Republican. And, one, you'll have to come out and defeat him, because otherwise the seat goes there, possibly. And two, I guess that's true. There's every opportunity. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's going to work with me, but I guess it could work with others. Greitens has the opportunity to tear him apart, or try to, in self-defense, but to the extent that he's able to do that, every success he has in knocking Hawley down or tarring him with anything that's legitimate and actually sticks, of course, it only ends up helping McCaskill. I don't know if Greitens cares about that. He's fighting for his life. He'll take anybody out to have that situation work out. So it should be a terrific soap opera. We'll watch and see how that plays out. All right, let's see. Flipping over to other stories and things that we have put aside. Let's see. Let's check in on comments here and catch up with a few things that people have suggested that we take a look at. Scrolling back a ways. Let's see. There's a lot going on here. People have been sharing a bunch of things since last program, some of which we've already touched on, some of which we won't be able to get to today. Let's see. The first thing I saw that I said, all right, that's short. Take a look at that. Twister Cat sent us this one with the comment, "Some things are better read aloud," which really sounds like a setup, but I'll take a look. It actually points to a Daily Beast story. Is it bylined? Not really. Okay, but this was sort of an interesting morning brief read. Report. DHS, Department of Homeland Security. DHS accidentally releases remote mind control records. That is not to say that they've released a new record and that when you put it on your turntable, if you've got one, it will remotely control your mind. No, these are records of the sort that you keep on paper that say things like, let's have a mind control experiment. And one wonders why you would write such a thing down unless it's itself mind control. If you could force somebody, brainwash DHS people into writing down notes about a non-existent remote mind control program for the purposes of fooling America into believing there was a remote mind control program, then you would really have something. Instead, we have this. In response to a journalist's standard Freedom of Information Act request for records on Antifa, which is how I've chosen to adopt the pronunciation for anti-fascist, Antifa and white supremacist groups, because both sides, the Washington State Fusion Center reportedly released a file containing records on, quote, remote mind control techniques. How interesting is that? And by the way, buried in the sentence there, remember that there is a Washington State Fusion Center, and that's scary and possibly un-American all by itself, but what the hell? We'll put that aside for the moment and talk about, they're all over the place. And that battle's been fought and lost. So, all right, like we said, a journalist has made a standard Freedom of Information Act request about both sides, white supremacist, fascist Nazis, and the people who oppose them, because dirty, rotten bastards, they're on the other side, and we have to investigate both of them. But instead, they got records on remote mind control techniques. According to Muckrock, a non-profit group that publishes government information gathered through FOIA requests, the mind control documents came from the Department of Homeland Security linked agency, the Fusion Center, in the form of a file called EM Effects on Human Body .zip. How do you like that? And that's not to say that there are zip effects on the human body. That's the extension of the file. Okay, so a zip file full of information on EM, electromagnetism, I don't know. Or I don't know what EM might be. Other than that, and effects on the human body. All right. Well, according to them, that's what's in this file. And we're running up against our break now, and let's see what we can squeeze in before then. Because it's very short. Okay. How'd you like to hear this? The file reportedly contained various diagrams detailing the horrors of, quote, psychoelectronic weapon effects. What might that be? I wonder if that's what they've been using, or the Cubans or somebody have been using against our embassy staff down there in Havana. I don't know. That's a good question. Link 2 stories. One diagram lists the various forms of torment supposedly made possible by using remote mind control methods, from, quote, forced memory blanking and sudden violent itching inside eyelids to wild flailing followed by rigor mortis. And how about this one? This is what it's all about. A remotely induced forced orgasm. Good morning. How's your breakfast going? I don't know. That seems like a weird effect to have. We'll talk about it never again, probably. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Hope I'm not forcing any of you to have remote mind control orgasms. It's not my intention, but if it happens, it happens, and I guess you could consider it part of the bonus package of a Patreon contribution. I got to get a hold of this stuff. How would you like that? For $20 level monthly support, I will just randomly, remotely force orgasms on you through electromagnetic spectrum attacks. And, it sounds like some of you might be thinking that's not the worst thing in the world, but an inconveniently timed forced remote orgasm, I suppose, could affect you at work, let's say, and you don't want that, unless you do, or that doesn't really disqualify you in any way, and in which case I would ask you, what line of work are you in, and are you hiring, I guess would be the second question. Or, you know what, don't pay me, where do you work? Might be enough for some people. Still, there's mortgages to pay, et cetera, et cetera. So, practical considerations enter into it again anyway. That wasn't actually the end of the short article, but that was the last thing I was willing to say. I'll tell you what the rest of it is, though. It says, it was not immediately clear how the documents wound up in the agency's response to a standard FOIA request. Somebody who was probably in the middle of a forced orgasm and just screwed up. But there was reportedly no indication the remote mind control files stemmed from any government program. Which, okay, it doesn't say that. It's just a question of why would you have such a file? And the answer is in case Dr. Evil shows up, I guess, and tries to control our minds. We just want to be aware of the effects of EM. I really do suppose that's going to be electromagnetism, effects on the human body. And who knew that such things were possible? Or, again, just maybe they just want you to think they're possible. It's Inception all over again. What we'll do here is there aren't any remote mind control techniques, but if the Department of Homeland Security, quote-unquote, accidentally released a file called EM Effects on the Human Body .zip, Everyone would read about it. Oh my God, forced memory blanking. Everyone will be interested. Everyone believes that there, could just possibly be at least secret experiments going on, even if they were total failures. And wouldn't we all like to know about what the government has been up to? I don't know. It's so conspiracy theory-ish. People are kind of tired of that stuff. It's very hackneyed 1950s stuff. Try throwing in forced orgasm just to try to sex it up a little bit. No pun intended. And, more people will be interested in it. And, I don't know what comes of that. I'm not supposed to, you know what? Moving on. It's actually right up next to, on the Daily Beast's cheat sheet, as they have it styled here, their top 10 stories or so for the morning. Right up next to, I guess maybe this is how, just Twister Cat, is this how you found this thing? The number 2 story on the list here. And it surely is number 2, this story. Michael Cohen drops the libel suit against BuzzFeed and Fusion GPS. And my guess is that maybe in looking at that, you said, oh, look at that. What's number 1? Remote mind control. I'm sort of interested in that, even if I don't know about the remote forced orgasm story up front. Wink, wink. I know it's coming. I'm getting out of this story. Moving along. Number 3 on the list. Men arrested at Starbucks break their silence. I'm somewhat interested in that, so I'll keep this window open. But I'm telling you, there's more important stories out there to get to, so let's just, if we can't force the orgasms, we can at least force ourselves onto different stories, and consider that to be a welcome payoff for all our troubles as well. What do we have? I don't know, but I better start on him immediately. Here's the top of the pocket list. I thought this one, the last thing, probably last night, that I thought was terribly interesting and put aside for you. This New York Times piece, sanctions flap. That's all it is, a flap. Sanctions flap erupts into open conflict between Haley and White House. I knew this would eventually develop along these lines. It was pretty easy to see, pretty well telegraphed. Yeah, so Nikki Haley doing the responsible-ish thing on behalf of the Trump-ish, administration-ish thing they have going on in the White House, going to the UN and saying, yep, sanctions are coming. How do I know? Because the president said, nobody's tougher on Russia than me. And sanctions are coming, which she knows, again, because he followed that up by saying, sanctions are coming. That's how I know how tough I am on Russia. So she announced that the sanctions were coming, and Trump chickened out and said, we got to get rid of these sanctions. And who told you to say there were sanctions? And it's now gotten to the point, because the Trump thing is you never back down from anything and you never say you're wrong. So, of course, in this case, he's wrong. So all energy has to go into portraying Nikki Haley as wrong. And no one's sure how long she's going to stand for this. It may be forever, or it may be that she does just fine and, stands up to the criticism and just, agrees to let it roll off her back because loyalty to the president or whatever. Or now, of course, they're floating her as a potential vice presidential nominee on a Mike Pence ticket. I don't think that's really any kind of reward. But, if you're Nikki Haley, maybe you think that's a good ticket out of this whole thing. But my guess is that Trump just continues to invent in his mind the idea that Nikki Haley is remaining in office in defiance of him, even if she says nothing. And he'll just begin to resent it more and more and more until he finally builds a case against her in his fevered brain and fires her. And it will all have been for naught, because that's what it is to work for Donald Trump. You have a soul left? Good, I ate it. Now get out of here. Here's the story. Peter Baker, Julie Hirschfeld Davis, and Maggie Haberman, all on this story. President Trump was watching television on Sunday. Can you believe it? It's already fake news. He was watching television on Sunday when he saw Nikki Haley, his ambassador to the UN, announce that he would impose fresh sanctions on Russia. The president grew angry. Something is happening on television, and it's about me. Rah, rah, rah. And it doesn't even say it's a bad thing. It's just, I don't know. I know it scares me because Russia might be angry, and they'll release the P-tape. The president grew angry, according to an official informed about the moment. As far as he was concerned, he had decided no such thing. It was not the first time Mr. Trump had yelled at the television over something he saw Ms. Haley saying. Of course, it wasn't even the first time he had yelled at the television that half hour. But this one was about Nikki Haley. This time, however, the divergence has spilled into public in a remarkable display of discord that stems not just from competing views of Russia, but from larger questions of political ambition, jealousy, resentment, and loyalty. The rift erupted into open conflict on Tuesday when a White House official blamed Ms. Haley's statement about sanctions on, quote, momentary confusion. So she was hit by electromagnetic weapons. And I don't even need to tell you what else happened. That prompted her to fire back, saying that she did not, quote, get confused, because that would be embarrassing to admit to, right? The public disagreement embarrassed Ms. Haley, and reinforced questions about Mr. Trump's foreign policy and who speaks for his administration. As you can see here, it is not anywhere noted that it embarrassed Trump, because that doesn't happen. He doesn't get embarrassed about things. You're just wrong. At the very least, the episode highlighted the crossed circuits over foreign policy. Thank you, New York Times. Of course. At the very least, that. In an administration with no Secretary of State, an increasingly marginalized White House Chief of Staff, and a national security advisor who has only been on the job for a week and has pushed out many of the senior national security officials in the White House, but has yet to bring in his own team. And it might as well be noted, he is the third national security advisor inside of a year, so la-di-da. Since Mr. Trump fired Secretary of State Rex Tillerson last month, Ms. Haley has been the administration's leading foreign policy figure, and yet she was not kept in the loop on a major decision involving perhaps America's most powerful adversary. Time out, yes, she was. It's just that lunatic, idiot, moron changed the loop after he told her what it was. According to several officials, the White House did not inform Ms. Haley that it had changed course on sanctions, leaving her to hang out alone, which is to say they didn't change course on sanctions. Trump flipped because he was, goofing around watching television, even if he didn't see anything on TV. He chickened out. He got cold feet, and he didn't tell anybody because why would Trump tell anybody, I've got cold feet? I'm a chicken. I'm a beta cuck, as they would say in alt-right circles. He's not going to say that. He's just going to change his mind and do it, and then fire anybody who doesn't say, oh, right, Mr. Trump. Yes, Mr. Trump. That was always the position, Mr. Trump. We understand that, Mr. Trump. Should I tell, everybody else in the foreign policy sector? No, because, who cares? I'm the president. When I say goes. And then when somebody, reads the statement that you gave them to read yesterday and doesn't know that you changed your mind because you're the only one that does know that you changed your mind, and you didn't want to tell anybody that because screw everybody. Give me some cereal. I'm hungry. More ice cream. TV. Telly. So, I'm not going to bother telling anybody anything. And then, in your mind, everybody got the memo anyway because that's the job of the idiots you keep surrounding you. Bring you Diet Cokes and see if you changed your mind on anything. And if I do, then I have people to tell the people that I changed my mind. Even though I don't tell my people who I hired to have that job that I changed my mind, because who knows? Because no one knows what happens in my mind because it doesn't work like a normal mind. No one can tell. I'm sitting here just eating Cheetos and drinking Diet Coke. Can't you see I changed my mind? No, I can't tell what's on your mind when you're working, much less when you're goofing off. Anyway, so she gets to bear the brunt of this. But everyone will eventually, because working for Trump means death. Just accept it. The story goes on, though, to say it damages her credibility going forward and once again makes everyone, friend and foe alike, wonder that when the United States says something, approves something, calls for something, opposes something, is it for real? Said Representative Jerry Connolly, Democrat of Virginia, and a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Should we wait to see what Trump does the next day? We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I might go to we might meet with North Korea. We might not. We might do this. We might not. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll see. We'll wait and see. Yeah. Well, huge problem, of course. But bigger problem is his infantile instability. And I thought that Connolly could have ended up very easily in saying that. But it's interesting that he puts it out there. It damages her credibility going forward. I mean, it does, in a sense, but only because nobody's willing to say about the President of the United States, even if he's a fake one like this guy. What's damaged here, or non-existent, is his credibility. It damages her credibility because she agreed to carry water for a guy with no credibility, but it all starts and ends with his lack of credibility, and Connolly should feel free to say so. And I imagine if you pressed him on the issue, he would say, yeah, you're right about that. I got no reason to say no to that. I'm not protecting him. I was just talking off the cuff, and don't hold me to that. The clash was reminiscent of various occasions when Mr. Trump has directly undercut subordinates, as when Mr. Tillerson broached the idea of negotiations with North Korea, and the president scolded him on Twitter not to waste his time. So I fired him and started talking on Twitter every day about negotiating with North Korea. You see how dumb this is? Many in Washington at the United Nations were riveted by the sharp exchange on Tuesday between the White House and its senior international diplomat. They're all, at the UN, they're all diplomats, and they're used to things being done properly. So they were riveted by the S word, the S show that was going on in front of their eyes. She got ahead of the curve, Larry Kudlow, the president's national economics advisor, told reporters at a briefing in Florida before Mr. Trump welcomed Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan to his Mar-a-Lago estate. She's done a great job. She's a very effective ambassador, but there might have been some momentary confusion about that. Ms. Haley took umbrage. She's like smart and thinks that she should be considered as such. A few hours later, she spoke with Dana Perino of Fox News, who quoted her response on air. With all due respect, I don't get confused. Well, that might be a bit of an overstatement, but I'm sure you weren't confused about this. Or I'm willing to agree, for the sake of argument. Mr. Kudlow then called Ms. Haley to apologize. Okay. I thought for a moment that Mr. Kudlow then called on Ms. Haley to apologize. Like, you need to apologize to me for saying that I was wrong about your being confused. You are. But no, it's the opposite. Kudlow called Haley to express, I guess, his own apologies to her. She was certainly not confused. Mr. Kudlow told the New York Times by telephone, I was wrong to say that. Totally wrong. That's nice. You could have said, she wasn't confused. I was confused. But who wants to say that? He added, as it turns out, she was basically following what she thought was policy. The policy was changed and she wasn't told about it, so she was in a box. Yes, and because of the nature of the beast here, and you want to keep your job, for whatever reason, I really can't understand why it is you want to keep your job with the Trump administration, but what you're really saying here is, another way of saying this, as it turns out, she was basically following what she thought was policy. The policy was changed. She wasn't told about it. She was in a box. Basically, she was following what had been described to her as policy. Moron Cheeto Muncher changed his mind and didn't tell anybody about it. So he put her in a box and then said, what the hell are you doing in a box? And was furious. That's what's going on here. The president is a childish moron out of control. Everybody else has to flop around on the floor finding ways to pretend that they're at fault for it, and it's fairly disgusting. The argument that Ms. Haley had merely gotten out ahead of a decision was undercut by the fact that the White House itself had sent out word to surrogates on Saturday, the day before her remarks, and I mean, it's the weekend, for God's sake, letting them know that it had already decided to take punitive action against Moscow. That's sanctions. She, on Sunday, read the memo that had been sent to her on Saturday telling her what to say the next day. Trump furious about that because I changed my mind when I ate that Cheeto. We also intend to impose specific additional sanctions against Russia to respond to Moscow's ongoing support for the Assad regime, which has enabled the regime's atrocities against the Syrian people, said a document distributed by the Republican National Committee that was titled White House Talking Points, which they really probably shouldn't have been distributing. But okay, they were. And yet, an administration official said there was a quick recognition on Sunday that Ms. Haley had gone too far in her remarks on Face the Nation on CBS. This official said that the State Department called an aide to Ms. Haley shortly after she appeared on the show to suggest she issue a correction. Ms. Haley's aide replied that her office was considering a correction. What else are you going to say? But none was ever released. Instead, the White House was left to say the next day that no sanctions had been approved. Such conflicts leave foreign governments in a bind as they try to interpret American moves. Coordinated messaging by our government on matters as serious as these is very important. So it is best that an episode such as this one not be repeated. That's kind of useless, said John Negroponte, former ambassador to the United Nations. He added that he was confident that Ms. Haley, quote, has absolutely no interest in undercutting, contradicting, or getting out in front of the White House. Beyond the immediate disconnect, though, and that's probably true, she's just furious that she followed their directions and they still blame her for doing something wrong. But that's the nature of working for Trump. Now, to some extent, it's the nature of working for any administration. It can happen, and you just kind of have to swallow it when it does. But this happens on every issue, every time, every day with Donald Trump, and you should realize that. Like the other is an outlier, and you say, hey, that's sort of part of the deal. You're going to take a high-ranking position working directly for the President of the United States. It's going to happen, and from time to time, you're going to be forced to take heat that the president should, by rights, take. But being the president, we have a very strong interest in transferring that heat to someone else who won't pay as big a price for it, i.e., lose in the polls. But this is like routine stuff, and it happens all the time, and he seems to relish it and like make a game of it. I love chaos. It works great. And so he's changing his mind. To the extent he has any kind of strategy at all, well, I don't believe he really does. No one really does. I think he just thinks, when I change my mind, it's awesome, so there should be no barrier to it, and people should just find out about it. And if they don't, screw them. My mind is fantastic, and the things that go on here are awesome. If you can't read it, that's your problem. If you don't like it, screw you. Quit. I think that's all he cares about. That's all that's going on for him. Beyond the immediate disconnect, though, is a deeper strain between Mr. Trump and Ms. Haley. New York Times. According to administration officials and other insiders, Ms. Haley has been perhaps the most hawkish voice on Russia. Uh-oh, that's a huge sin, right? Nobody's been tougher. Wait a minute. Nobody's been tougher on Russia than I have. You're now saying you've been tougher on Russia? That's a firing offense, in my view. Ms. Haley has been perhaps the second, maybe, possibly, if you'll permit it, most hawkish voice on Russia, on a team headed by a president who has emphasized his fervent desire for friendship with President Vladimir V. Putin. God damn you, New York Times, wasting my time. We know who Putin is. At times, that serves the president's interest because she can say what he will not. But at other times, he has grown exasperated by her outspokenness. And this was supposed to be good cop, bad cop situation. Damn it, we're both bad cops. What's wrong with you? He thinks we're both good cops. Be friendly to Russia. The rest of the country thinks, no, bad cop. You're being good to the criminal. That's backwards. At one point recently, he saw Ms. Haley on television, of course, sharply criticizing Russia over its intervention in Ukraine. Who wrote that for her? Mr. Trump yelled angrily at the screen, according to people briefed on the moment. Who wrote that for her? Imagine getting briefed on what the president yelled at the television. I'd quit. I'd have a steak dinner in the Lowe's Regency Hotel, if you know what I mean. A former governor of South Carolina. Oh, yeah. Remember when she had a career? Ms. Haley has assumed a more prominent role than most of her predecessors, at times eclipsing the Secretary of State. Well, he got fired. It's hard not to. I eclipsed the Secretary of State when it comes to that. Along the way, Mr. Trump has grown suspicious of her ambition. Convinced that she had been angling for Mr. Tillerson's position and increasingly wondering whether she wants his own job. Of course, whatever. Never mind. I think I'll let that one just pass. Well, Republicans close to the White House whisper about the prospect of an alliance between Ms. Haley and Vice President Mike Pence, possibly to run as a ticket in 2020. Well, now that would upset him a little bit. Though he may retire to ice cream and golf, but he doesn't want anybody to know that. Aides to both, that it would be Haley and Pence, scoff at such suggestions. But the slightest hint of such a pairing would be likely to enrage Mr. Trump, who has made it clear that he plans to run for re-election. The talk was exacerbated in recent days when Mr. Pence named John Lerner, Ms. Haley's deputy, as his new national security advisor, while allowing him to keep his job at the United Nations. By the way, Trump should step up here and just say, no, you're not allowed to have a national security advisor. Mike, you have my national security advisor. If you want advice about national security, take it from me. And by which I mean take it from this other guy over here who gives me advice on national security. And it's routine thing, obviously. The vice president has to have his own, well, I guess he doesn't have to. Routinely does, though, have his own national security advisor because reasons. And I could see that annoying Trump very much. Why he doesn't simply forbid it, I don't know. I don't know if there's any formal process by which he could do that, but who cares? Formal process. Just yell and scream at the television that you don't want it. That's enough. The plan collapsed within 48 hours when Mr. Trump grew angry at reports that Mr. Lerner, I guess it did work, had made anti-Trump ads for the Club for Growth, an economic conservative advocacy group. No, it isn't. I mean, not really. During Republican primaries in 2016. They think they are, but they aren't. Mr. Lerner stepped down from the job in Mr. Pence's office. Wow, it worked. Ms. Haley draws strong feelings on both sides of the aisle. In Republican circles, she's a favorite of neoconservatives and national security hawks like Senators John McCain of Arizona and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, but viewed skeptically by the more isolationist wing that sees Mr. Trump as a champion. Among Democrats, she has respect from those who see her as a voice of reason and scorn from others who see her as overly combative. Nikki Haley is a neocon in her view, said Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California. Basically, she's a parrot for the McCain-Lindsey Graham worldview of let's go bomb Iran, let's go fight another Cold War with Russia, let's go use force around the world. Mr. Connolly, on the other hand, describes her as an important counterpoint to Trump. She's been a little island of some sanity in this otherwise dysfunctional, irrational, volatile White House when it comes to foreign policy, he said. She's now getting the Tillerson treatment, and so perhaps this island will be swallowed up by rising sea levels. Ooh, good dig there at the end, because, of course, we believe in rising sea levels. Interesting dynamics going on in this idiot moron White House, and well worth noting as her island slips under the sea. She was rock solid for a while, but anybody who's competent is a problem for Trump. And then, of course, if you try to hide from that problem by being incompetent, you'll be fired for being incompetent. There's no winning in this. All right. Where to next? Well, let's read a little bit of, another article that was sent to me as a suggestion by many listeners, and I think mentioned by Greg. Josh Marshall has been paying close attention to the Cohen story, and it's been interesting to watch, and lots of people are thrilled to read what's up there. And I guess if you are both a close reader of Josh Marshall's ed blog, editor's blog over at TPM, and a listener to KTM, you probably think, hey, these guys are pretty much on the same page. And we sort of are. I think we've covered a lot of this stuff over the months. And but it appears, as usual, I mean, I don't think Josh Marshall's not listening to the show. We can be pretty clear about that. And but Josh Marshall has a tendency to think he's the only person looking at anything at any given time. But that has to do with the fact that he has a much larger audience than, say, our little show over here. But I would say it's probably largely a fruitless effort. Do not spend any time pursuing Josh Marshall in order to get credit for anything but TPM when it comes to saying, yeah, we were there on the same page too, and have been covering it for a long time. It is of no interest to him to do so, and really, frankly, of no payoff whatsoever for us either. It's just one of those weird dynamics of the, I don't know what you would call it, the leftosphere on this. But for our purposes, we'll read what he writes anyway because it's self-reinforcing. And we love that here on the show because it's me. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We just finished up with the break saying we love to self-reinforce here because it's me, and sometimes it's lonely just sitting here at the microphone all by myself, and, I need a little confidence booster from time to time. We'll get to that. Before we transition off of Nikki Haley and the incoherent Trump foreign policy entirely, we'll take a quick look at the other thing occupying a lot of Twitter time earlier this morning. Doesn't look like it's a sustained thing. It was just a brief burst. But my second karma story, even if I do misunderstand the concept entirely, was about, I had mentioned Rex Tillerson. Ronan Farrow tweeting this morning, and I happened to catch this one, the purging of the State Department, he says, and why it's so important to America's future. Read my latest in New Yorker, in which Rex Tillerson unloads on the White House and the White House on Tillerson, drawn from my new book, War on Peace. Interesting. I like the title. And, of course, Ronan Farrow on a real tear these days. The linked article, Inside Rex Tillerson's Ouster. Let's take a look. Of course, it is him excerpting his new book. The book is probably, we couldn't read the book on the show because books are long and they take a very long time, and so we would be unlikely to be able to get all the way through it. Oh, look at this. I've hit my paywall on the New Yorker, which is testament to the good job that the New Yorker has been doing, attracting my attention. Anyway, let's see if I can read it via Pocket. I can't be subscribing to every goddamn thing in the world at this point. Wonder if Pocket will allow me to take a look. If not, we can make short work of the story. Anyway, Rex Tillerson's team, it appears to start off, was fighting again. Quote, so who's going to go in with him? Margaret Peterlin, his chief of staff, was saying. She looked me up and down with an expression that suggested she'd discovered a pest in the house. We were standing at the wide double doors into the Secretary of State's office on Mahogany Row, the opulent wood-paneled corridor on the 7th floor of the State Department's Washington, D.C. headquarters, which houses the most powerful offices in American foreign policy. Stephen Goldstein, the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, folded his arms and stared daggers at Peterlin. Well, I guess I won't be, he told her. Heather can go. Goldstein tilted his head towards Tillerson's spokesperson, the former Fox News anchor Heather Nauert. Peterlin narrowed her eyes at Goldstein. Are you sure? She said, with theatrical displeasure. Goldstein didn't reply. Tillerson strode up to the door, cutting the tension. Nauert and Peterlin joined the interview, along with Tillerson's director of policy planning, Brian Hook. Goldstein remained outside. Peterlin said that she was following a rule enacted by Secretary Tillerson that only one communications officer be allowed in his interviews. Such discord often simmered just under the surface in the year before Tillerson's unceremonious firing in March, according to multiple members of his embattled inner circle. Often it emanated from Peterlin, a formidable attorney, U.S. Navy veteran, and former congressional staffer who helped draft the Patriot Act after the September 11th attacks and guided Tillerson through his confirmation process. When she was passed a note indicating I'd arrived that day, she'd given the rest of the team an ultimatum. From the public relations staff, only Goldstein would be permitted in the interview. Goldstein had pointed out that Nauert, as spokesperson, would be responsible for answering ensuing public questions. Nobody wants in on this. Very interesting. So you get the idea of the level of drama and tension among the staff there, about which Tillerson did absolutely nothing to smooth things out, which is amazing because he was the chief diplomat of the United States and basically sucked so horribly at the job that it's I guess he probably would have been fired under any normal circumstances anyway, but it was a sure thing with Trump. Anyway, I had actually picked up on the story mostly because of the way Ronan put it in his tweet about the purging of the State Department and that Tillerson would be unloading on the White House. White House, of course, firing back. But what struck me about the whole thing, karma-wise, was that Tillerson, as I wrote, cheerfully volunteered to take on the job of destroying the State Department. And he did so, by the way, I always thought, still thinking that or still suffering, I would say, perhaps, from American corporate CEO-itis, thinking you are an indispensable man. And as it turns out, Trump doesn't believe in any indispensable man other than himself. And so, sorry, Tillerson, I know you were brought up in this culture, and as CEO of ExxonMobil, it's easy to understand why you would come to that conclusion. It's amazing, though, in all of this, how many very high-profile, sort of kind of actual businessmen have been totally destroyed by somebody who has no business credentials whatsoever, but television has told America was the most amazing, smartest businessman in American or possibly world history. No one has ever been treated even better in China's entire history. Not that that has anything to do with your business acumen, but he believes it does, of course. Trump is a total loser with respect to business acumen. Imagine being the CEO of ExxonMobil. Well, imagine being the CEO of ExxonMobil despite the fact that you're a pretty limited human being in the first place. These things do happen. People fail upwards into these positions all the time. Nothing particularly, your first instinct would be to say, gotta be a smart guy. You can fail upwards in some companies, but you would think that something as high profile as ExxonMobil would be pretty choosy about this stuff. Nope. Everybody's an idiot. You shouldn't get out of bed in the morning. That basically is what I'm saying. But sure enough, he goes in there thinking, I'm the friggin' CEO of ExxonMobil. I can handle this guy. I know Trump's a joke, but I know I have to pretend that Trump's not a joke in order for me to be seen as the awesome guy I am. And I'm excited for whatever reason about the idea of dismantling the State Department. I don't know how he came to that position on his own. I don't think he copied it from Trump. I think he actually wanted to destroy the State Department and thought this was a great opportunity. So does the president. I'll go do this thing. But he thought he would come in and go about his business and Trump would leave him alone because Trump would respect him as the former CEO of ExxonMobil, because no moron would be capable, however stupid he is, however crazy he is, of thinking that the Trump empire, even if you believed estimates of its net value, outweigh the business acumen of the CEO of ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil dwarfs everything. Not just the Trump empire, but it happens to completely dwarf the Trump empire, whether at its inflated value or not. And nope, he found out pretty quick. His soul was going to be shredded and eaten by Trump as well. So another good karma situation in my view. Just wanted to kind of highlight that and point that one out. Now, by way of transition to other items, before we get off of the foreign policy and the substantive governance, to the extent that it happens, issues, I wanted to note the tweet I picked up from Scout Finch, Jennifer Hayden, yesterday, pointing to, where is this article up here? Let's see. I'll have to open it up. It's the TikTok, as journos love to say, the TikTok following Haley's comments and the subsequent reversal of policy raises the question of who was notified first. That is, no one told Nikki Haley, but did they tell anyone else that Trump had changed his mind? And it sounds like they did, and you won't believe who got notice and who didn't. Let's see. Is there a article linked to this? No, it's a screen grab of an article instead. And we're looking at the tweet of, Jen's tweet here has been appended to the tweet of Biana Golodriga, the CBS News correspondent whose name you probably know how to pronounce because she's on CBS News and they say those things out loud. So, whoops, I've lost the tweet I had here. But I had, this was it. Long story short, Jen was asking, and this gives away the point of who got informed first. Now, why would they reach out, she says, directly to the Russian embassy to let them know they were, in fact, not going to enforce sanctions? It is so painfully obvious Donald Trump fears the release of whatever Putin has on him. This is ridiculous. And she's quite right. Biana's tweet here on the TikTok following Haley's comments. Who was notified first, Russia or Haley? And the screen grab of the piece here, the highlighted portion, sometime after Haley's comments on CBS, the Trump administration notified the Russian embassy in Washington that the sanctions were not, in fact, coming, a Russian foreign ministry official said on Monday. Isn't that amazing? Why bother telling your top remaining foreign policy official? And the answer is, of course, Trump doesn't have foreign policy officials. He is the foreign policy. And you got to hear it straight from him. Now, I guess I'd have some questions about whether or not the Russian foreign ministry was telling the truth. If you really wanted to sow confusion and discord in the United States, I would absolutely leak it to the press that not only are no sanctions coming, but the president told us that personally, himself, directly, and did so before even bothering to check in with his own foreign policy establishment, because there is no foreign policy establishment. Trump believes it's him, and luckily we over here in Russia believe we are Trump, and so therefore we set United States foreign policy, particularly foreign policy towards us. Isn't that convenient? What an amazing situation. And of course it's conflict of interest. Why, I ought to get a temporary restraining order against you, Russia. That'll teach you. All right. Back over to Michael Cohen and the seething underbelly of all of this stuff. Josh Marshall, as I mentioned, writing this piece yesterday, Cohenology pays off after all. And he's got an interesting way of getting around to the story here. Yesterday afternoon, I had one of those epiphanies, he says, about a story I usually have no more than once every few years. That is an epiphany about a story that he doesn't experience all that often. Sorry, I screwed that up. It was partly triggered by details I put in this post about Michael Cohen, but it wasn't about that alone. It was the sum of a dozen developments since the raid on Cohen's home and offices and the hotel room last Monday. Starting over a year ago, he says, we focused our resources tightly on Cohen, Sater, and an assortment of lesser capos and good fellas in the Trump syndicate. And, of course, we here took note of that and probably read a lot of it on the show, although I don't recall that it was always TPM that we were returning to on this. But, yeah, we went along for the ride at the very least. My first interest in the whole question of Trump's ties to Russia began before we had any idea that there was a 2016 subversion and interference campaign. It was about the money. As events unfolded late in 2016, it seemed clear to me that whatever had happened between Trump and Russia in 2016, if anything had, it had to grow out of the Trump-Russia money channel, which stretched back at least to the first years of this century. Cohen and Sater were at the center of it. The bizarre peace plan caper in February of 2017 just confirmed my sense that these two, but especially Cohen, played some critical role. And yet, I have to confess that as the Trump-Russia story and then the special counsel probe moved forward, I began to wonder whether, despite all the indications, the Cohen angle was somehow just a dry hole. Despite making an appearance before a congressional committee, Cohen had barely registered as part of the unfolding story over the last year. So I was fascinated and perhaps a touch gratified to see him rocket back to the center of the story last week. We never gave up, but okay. Of course, we don't know yet what story he is at the center of. There are the hush agreements. New York prosecutors clearly think there's a mess of financial crimes. But even though Cohen's downfall may pose a grave danger to President Trump in itself, there is as yet no clear indication Cohen's case has any clear tie to the Russia probe. Indeed, on this point I should be clear, I've never thought Cohen was the mastermind of some grand deal with Russia, or indeed the mastermind of anything. He's always struck me as basically a dolt, someone whose value is based on aggression and loyalty, rather than any canniness or smarts. It's not about him being a mastermind or even a key player. It's that he was involved, often as a close Trump confidant, in all the paths of money and deal-making where a corrupt relationship with Russia's political or economic leadership would have emerged. This was all my thinking when I wrote this post yesterday evening, and he's linking to a different one. Good grief, Cohen's gets mobbier the closer I look, was the name of the piece there. That one about, of course, Michael Cohen's uncle and the social club that was the headquarters of the Russian mob, as we mentioned. As I noted, we'd known the El Caribe was a reputed mob hangout for Italian and Russian mobsters. What I hadn't realized was that the boss of the Russian mafia in the U.S. literally worked out of an office in that establishment. Then someone flagged me this excerpt of Seth Hettena's, I'm guessing Hettena's, Hettena, Hettena's new Trump-Russia book, just published in Rolling Stone. The excerpt, that is. Seth already had most of what I stumbled across yesterday. Now, who is Seth Hettena? It turns out we at TPM have known and admired Seth's work for years and years. He was one of the lead reporters, I think with the AP, on the Duke Cunningham scandal and wrote a book about it. A couple weeks ago, I was emailed a press release announcing the imminent release of Seth's new Trump-Russia book. I get a million press releases, but I had no idea he was even working on one. So I replied to the email and asked for a review copy, which arrived a few days ago. I had not gotten around to looking at it yet, but in that excerpt in Rolling Stone, the reference to the El Caribe is followed by these two paragraphs. And here he quotes from the Rolling Stone here. I spoke to two former federal investigators who told me Cohen was introduced to Donald Trump by his father-in-law, Fima Schusterman, a naturalized U.S. citizen from Ukraine who arrived in the U.S. in 1975. Schusterman was in the garment business and owned a fleet of taxicabs with his partners, Shalva Bautier and Edward Zubak. All three men were convicted of a money laundering-related offense in 1993. Fima may have been a possibly silent business partner with Trump, perhaps even used as a conduit for Russian investors in Trump properties and other ventures, a former federal investigator told me. Cohen, who married into the family, was given the job with the Trump Organization. Remember we talked about how did he get that job? Given the job with the Trump Organization as a favor to Schusterman. Untrue, Cohen told me. Your source is creating fake news. Well, of course, yesterday we discovered that the allegation was that basically what happened was he bought enough apartments to gain notice in Trump's eyes by getting himself quoted in a newspaper saying Donald Trump is fabulous and rich and I want to be fabulous and rich too. You're right. You're a smart investor, making you executive vice president. This, I think, helps explain a little bit about it too, right? Schusterman, who owned at least 4 New York City taxi companies, also set his son-in-law up in the yellow cab business. Cohen once ran 260 yellow cabs with his Ukrainian-born partner, the taxi king, Simon V. Garber, until their partnership ended acrimoniously in 2012. Glenn Simpson, the private investigator who was independently hired to examine Trump's Russia connections during the real estate mogul's presidential run, testified before the House Intelligence Committee that Cohen, quote, had a lot of connections to the former Soviet Union, and that he seemed to have associations with organized crime figures in New York and Florida, Russian organized crime figures, including Garber. Now back to Josh in his reflection on this piece. Now, when I saw this, my jaw dropped. Admittedly, the significance probably needs some deciphering, and perhaps you need to be a bit obsessed, but it connects together and makes sense of a number of key questions I've had. As I've explained many times here at TPM, Trump brought Cohen into the organization not because he was a lawyer, but because he was a conduit for money from Russia and Ukraine. I mean, he's a terrible lawyer, so it had to be something else, right? He'd been on a buying spree in the year or so before he was hired, buying up apartment units, for him and members of his Ukrainian immigrant family. Trump wanted access to that spigot and more. And it is pretty amazing. Like, you got to believe that there's much more behind it. Like, I mean, it's almost embarrassing that buying 8 apartments is considered enough of a spigot for Mr. Billionaire to even take notice of. Back to Josh here. So what Seth describes here, along with how Cohen got into the taxi business, is basically in line with my understanding, but I'd never realized Schusterman was such a critical player, perhaps even already a source of cash for Trump, and if Seth's source is right, the reason Cohen got his job. This brings a lot together, not least of which is fleshing out just what or who Cohen's money channel was based on. It also helps me understand, candidly, how a dope like Cohen got the gig. Quite apart from the money, it's always been clear, he's said as much, that Cohen has worshipped Trump since he was a high schooler, when Trump was king of the New York City tabloids. It may not seem like much, but for us, Cohenologists, it's like the missing link, where the derp meets the wise guys and it all makes sense. This all crystallized for me what I already knew or thought I knew, and added another layer of knowledge and illumination. I'll explain more, he says, about why in subsequent posts. For now, I strongly recommend getting a copy of Hetina's book. It's actually called Trump/Russia, A Definitive History. Sounds good. I plan to dig into my copy tonight. It's apparently available for pre-order now and comes out in early May. So I guess a little plug there for the book. Sounds good. Sounds like we're all on the same page once again. Even if I feel like we drew this conclusion some time ago, but admittedly, a lot of it would have been prompted by Josh Marshall's own interest in the Cohen case and the Cohen files along the way. So, very interesting and well worth our time just to wrap things up. Let's see. Other things that we can occupy a few minutes with. Pete B2 sending us this one. Senate procedure and discussing whether McConnell really has the power he asserts. Would love for you to discuss on KITM. Well, let's see if we can't fit in a little bit of a discussion of that. This is connected to the tweet of James Wallner. Let's find out a little bit about him and about it. Let's open it up. James Wallner, let's see, in his bio here, RSI Senior Fellow, R Street Institute, a free market think tank advancing real solutions, to complex policy problems. Adjunct professor at American University, Catholic University, contributor to the D.C. Examiner, which is a conservative rag, Law, Liberty, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like he's coming at things from a conservative viewpoint. Let's see what he has to say here. We're pointed at McConnell's or Wallner's tweet here that says McConnell decides what we take to the floor only so long as members defer to him to do so. Okay, I think we've hit some of those points with Greg over the past couple of days. Under the Senate's rules, any member can make a motion to proceed to a bill, and any bill can be offered as an amendment to legislation on the floor. Yes, in the main, I think that's about right. And he's referring here, or perhaps responding to, yet another tweet, this one from Alan He. Let's take a look at that. Alan He, I might as well look at his bio here. CBS Newser on Capitol Hill, it says. And let's see, got to get back to our chain of events here. He had tweeted He, that's his last name. McConnell on the special counsel protection bill. Quote, I am the one who decides what we take to the floor. That's my responsibility as the majority leader, and we will not be having this on the floor of the Senate. Okay. That leads us to James Wallner saying, okay, well, only to a certain extent. There are other senators have certain powers and abilities that would enable them, if they wanted to, expend a certain amount of political capital on it, get a bill like that to the floor. So James continues, leaders have long pretended otherwise. This isn't unique to McConnell. They all wish they had the formal power under the rules, but the fact is that they don't. Since leaders get their power from others' deference, they should be careful to avoid the appearance of using that power to the detriment of those on whose continued deference it depends. Why would the minority, or any senator, defer to a majority leader to schedule bills if the majority leader used it to stop the minority from raising issues with which it was concerned? And the answer is because the majority, well, I can short circuit this, but we might as well read through. Oh my goodness. Well, maybe not. He's got a rather extensive tweet storm on this. But, well, let's see. Since we're running out of time, I'll say it this way. I'll short circuit this conversation. We'll read this again. Why, he says, would the minority, or any senator, defer to a majority leader to schedule bills if the majority leader used it to stop the minority from raising issues with which it was concerned? And the answer is because it always comes down eventually to a vote. You can make a motion. Yes, any senator can make a motion to proceed to any bill. Any senator can offer a amendment of any kind to any bill. The question of whether or not it will really get substantive consideration, though, is solved by or resolved by a vote. Shall we take this up in consideration? And if the majority leader says, no, we shall not, or we should not, then it's a leadership question, and he turns to his working majority and says, I want a no vote from you on this. Now, if it turns out that it in fact reflects the wishes of a majority, that is to say, all of the members of the minority party plus some requisite number of the members of the majority party joining together in coalition, then yes, they can overcome the objection of the majority leader and bring a bill like that to the floor. That, though, creates tension inside of what is, in this case, the Republican conference in the Senate. And the fact that there's disagreement over one issue could, but usually doesn't, lead to a vote of, something that equates to a vote of no confidence in the majority leader. What instead happens is the majority leader makes a case to those few members of the majority party who are considering joining the minority in this that, listen, I can appreciate your interest in this, but there are larger overriding issues at stake here, one of which is control of the floor of the United States Senate. If you guys go off freelancing on things like this, then I don't have effective control of the floor, and that's the job you gave to me. If you want to take that job back, that's one thing. But I remind you that one of the chief benefits of having that job rest on someone else's shoulders is that I will constantly provide cover for you when necessary, and sometimes perform a function like this. You want to stake out a position publicly because you're running for re-election that you favor a bill protecting Robert Mueller. But in reality, you don't actually want Robert Mueller protected because you want this whole thing to end and your Republican president to be able to continue on in office unmolested, because it's bad for Republicans running for anything in the midterms when the president is under assault, particularly when he's under assault for valid reasons that are likely to sink his administration and take all Republicans down the toilet with him. So here's what we'll do. You'll say publicly, God damn it, I've got to have this bill protecting Robert Mueller. And I will say, no, I refuse to allow it on the floor. And then it won't come to the floor. And you can continue saying, I wanted it, but dag nabbit, that confounded McConnell kept stopping me. And then someone like James Wolner comes along and says, no, actually, you could have teamed up with the Democrats in order to do that. And they hush you up and say, shh, go away. I don't actually want anybody to know that. We inform you of such things. Wolner informs you of such things. We have different motivations, perhaps, in doing so. But eventually, what usually wins out is the majority leader's ability to bring pressure to bear on the rest of them. I know you want this, or even if you really do want it and don't actually just want protection from it, if you really genuinely were interested in having it, you could force my hand. But there are a lot of things I can do as majority leader to make you regret that. Particularly as you're running for re-election. We could make it so that you weren't part of the Republican Senate conference after all. Oh, well, when you put it that way, and since my interest in this bill was in furtherance of my own re-election efforts, perhaps I ought to reconsider. Well, I ate up every possible second with my answer to that. Hope it helped.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Coming up next, of course, Justice Putnam's roundup of every story that we ignored in order to create a possibility to give that sort of examination to Senate procedure. I can tell you this, they're all amazing. They've all been outlined for my review. I can't pass them on to you in the seconds I have left. Just stay tuned. You'll be glad you did.